Daniel sat at his desk, the glow of his screen painting his face pale as he whispered, "This can't be real." An email chain stared back at him, implicating him in fraud he had never touched. His pulse thudded like a drum, each beat louder than the last. The office, usually buzzing with chatter and clattering keyboards, suddenly felt like a vacuum swallowing sound. He tapped his badge nervously against the desk, trying to ground himself in something ordinary. The subject lines on the screen repeated his name, in bold, damning letters. His stomach twisted, acid rising with every click. "They're setting me up," he muttered, his hands trembling as he scrolled further. Colleagues passed by the glass wall, their faces blurred by his panic. He tried to swallow, but his throat closed, dry and tight, as though betrayal itself had taken root. The cursor blinked on the last line of the thread, like a mocking metronome. At that moment, his badge buzzed red at the office turnstile, the access denied beep echoing sharp and final. He froze, the sound striking him like a gunshot. For Daniel, silence and chaos had just collided. Daniel sat frozen at the turnstile, the denial beep echoing like a siren only he could hear. He forced a smile at a passing colleague, but her quick glance slid away as if contact would burn. His chest tightened with invisible hands gripping tighter each second. "Oh." He turned back to his desk, palms sweating, heartbeat racing in his ears. His phone buzzed, an anonymous message flashing. "We warned you." Cold shot through him, his knees weak. He muttered, "I didn't do this," though no one listened. The office, once routine, now looked foreign, every corner carrying hidden eyes. He sank into his chair, staring blankly at the monitor. He couldn't leave, couldn't stay, trapped in the cruel quiet of suspicion. Daniel returned to his chair, fingers gripping the armrest until his knuckles whitened. The hum of the office had shifted into uneasy silence. He glanced at co-workers in the distance, their heads bent, their voices hushed. No one looked his way. He typed nonsense on his keyboard, pretending to work, but every tap echoed false. Fear gnawed at him, every breath shallow. A manager's door clicked shut down the hall, the sound sharp like a gavel. He whispered, "They're already moving without me." His screen dimmed, access revoked, leaving him staring at a dark reflection of himself. The faint buzz of fluorescent lights felt louder than voices ever had. Daniel scrolled through his phone, searching for reassurance, but every call went unanswered. A vibration shook his palm, a company notice declaring his suspension pending investigation. His throat went dry, vision blurring at the edges. He slammed the phone on the desk, whispering, "They're burying me alive." He closed his eyes, fighting the rising urge to flee. The weight of the building pressed on him like concrete, each second slower than the last. Daniel pushed away from his desk, chairs scraping the floor loud in the suffocating quiet. He walked toward the exit, but every step dragged like iron. His colleagues, once warm, turned into statues, heads bent, avoiding him. He pressed his palm against the cold glass door, but it resisted like a barrier. He whispered, "I'm already erased." The air carried the scent of toner and stale coffee, now bitter as betrayal itself. He stood still, locked between escape and collapse, as the silence roared around him. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence where laughter used to be. His daughter, Emily, looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes, her fork unmoved on her plate. His wife, Sarah, stirred her soup without eating, her gaze fixed on the bowl. Daniel said, "They think I did it," his voice breaking under the weight. Sarah's spoon clattered, her hand trembling as she whispered, "What does that mean for us?" Emily whispered, "Dad, are you in trouble?" Daniel forced a smile, but it cracked at the edges, his eyes shadowed with fear. He rubbed his temples, words piling in his chest, but never escaping. The room smelled faintly of garlic bread, but it felt bitter on his tongue. He reached for Sarah's hand, but she pulled away, not out of anger but from a fear too heavy to share. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the blinds, painting stripes across Daniel's tired face. He sipped cold coffee, staring into the void of the mug. Sarah leaned against the counter, arms folded, her voice low but sharp. "Maybe it's better if you stop digging," she said, eyes wet with dread. Daniel clenched his jaw, shaking his head slowly. "If I stop, they win," he replied, voice hoarse but firm. Sarah's shoulders sagged, the weight of unspoken fears bending her posture. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the ticking clock on the wall. Emily peeked around the doorway, sensing storms without understanding them. Daniel forced his gaze to steady, but the cracks showed in every blink. Daniel sat on the couch that evening, his head leaning back, eyes shut tight. A stack of unpaid bills lay scattered on the coffee table. Emily climbed onto the couch, curling against him silently, her warmth anchoring him. He opened his eyes, kissed the top of her head, whispering, "It'll be okay." Sarah sat across the room, laptop open, her face dimly lit by the glow of headlines whispering rumors about him. She bit her lip, closed the screen, and said nothing. The silence grew heavy, pressing them closer yet pulling them apart. Daniel clenched Emily tighter, as if shielding her from a storm neither could stop. Rain tapped against the window as Daniel sat at his desk at home, papers scattered in chaos. He scribbled notes furiously, connecting fragments of truth with shaky line. Sarah entered, arms crossed, eyes tired from sleepless nights. "You're tearing yourself apart," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel looked up, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight. "If I stop, I'll lose myself," he replied. She exhaled heavily, torn between anger and despair, her shadow stretching long across the room. Thunder rumbled outside, as if echoing the storm inside their walls. Later that night, Daniel stood at the bathroom sink, gripping its edges, his reflection fractured in the mirror. Water dripped steadily, the sound like a ticking clock. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms hanging helplessly at her sides. Her eyes searched his face, desperate for reassurance. He whispered, "I can't quit now." She shook her head, tears brimming, whispering, "And what about us?" His reflection stared back at him, tired, broken, yet stubbornly unyielding. The mirror showed a man divided between duty and survival, every crack reflecting a cost too high to bear. Daniel entered the office the next morning, his steps echoing down the hallway like an unwelcome visitor. Conversations stopped as he passed, eyes dropping quickly to screens and papers. The manager's door closed sharply behind glass, blinds drawn, voices muffled inside. Daniel felt the air thicken, every breath heavy with suspicion. He sat at his desk, pretending to work while screens flickered in silent judgment. He whispered to himself, "They've already erased me." His email inbox showed meetings without his name, calendars where he was excluded. He clenched his fists, watching shadows of colleagues move around him, every whisper cutting like a blade. The office had turned into a theater of silence, and he was its condemned actor. Later that day, Daniel sat stiffly in HR, the room sterile with beige walls and fluorescent hum. Across the table, Karen, the HR officer, leaned forward, her tone calm but sharp. "We've had concerns," she said, sliding a thin folder toward him. His pulse jumped as he opened it, finding vague accusations written in cold, clinical words. "I didn't do this," Daniel replied, voice cracking despite his effort. Karen's expression stayed neutral, but her eyes avoided his. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Daniel realized the room wasn't for truth, but for record-keeping, each word a trap. That evening, Daniel dug through old reports, papers spread chaotically across his desk. Numbers blurred as his tired eyes traced mismatched totals, threads of fraud stitched into the fabric of the company. His hands shook as he circled figures, whispering, "This is it. This is proof." The lamp buzzed above him, casting sharp shadows across his desk. Outside, the city lights twinkled through his window, oblivious to his collapse. Every sheet felt heavier than the last, a burden pulling him down. His chest ached with dread, knowing each discovery chained him tighter to danger. At dinner, Sarah pushed food around her plate, her silence louder than words. Emily watched between them, sensing storms she could not name. Daniel said softly, I found something bigger. Sarah snapped, her voice trembling. And what if it destroys us? He clenched his jaw, staring at his fork, unable to meet her eyes. Emily whispered, "Don't fight," her small voice shattering the fragile quiet. Daniel looked at his daughter, guilt carving lines deeper into his face. Sarah's shoulders slumped, her strength drained by fear. The family table had turned into a battlefield without raising a weapon. Daniel lay awake in bed, the ceiling spinning as shadows shifted with each passing car outside. Sarah slept beside him, restless, her breath shallow, her face turned away. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a message flashing, "Stop or pay the price." He gripped it, pulse racing, staring into the darkness. His throat closed, words locked deep inside him. Every sound in the house felt amplified, the creak of wood, the hum of electricity, the beating of his heart. Sleep never came, only the heavy silence of dread pressing harder on his chest. Daniel sat across from Michael, his closest colleague, in the dim corner of a cafe. Michael leaned in, voice low, "You need to be careful." Daniel's eyes searched his, desperate for trust. "I thought you were with me," Daniel said, words heavy with hope. Michael looked away, his hand trembling slightly as he stirred his coffee. The silence between them said more than words could. Daniel felt a chill creep into his chest, realizing loyalty was fading. "Don't make me your enemy," Michael whispered finally, eyes cold when they returned. Daniel's throat tightened, betrayal cutting deeper than any accusation. The cafe's warmth couldn't hide the frost forming between them. Daniel returned to his desk only to find a file placed neatly on top. He opened it, his stomach dropping as he saw documents marked with his name, numbers forged to link him directly to fraud. His pulse hammered as he whispered, "This isn't mine." The papers reeked of fabrication, every line carefully crafted. He glanced up to see colleagues peering from behind screens, their silence sharp. He felt the walls closing in, as though the building itself conspired against him. His hands trembled, smudging ink on the forged reports. Fear turned into dread as he realized someone had planted the trap. That evening, Daniel met Sarah in their living room, papers spread across the coffee table. His voice cracked, "They've built evidence against me." Sarah's hands covered her mouth, eyes wide with fear. "Then it's over," she whispered, sinking into the couch. Daniel shook his head, veins standing in his neck. "No, it means I fight harder." Emily peeked from the hallway, clutching her stuffed toy, her innocence colliding with the weight of their crisis. The room buzzed with unspoken dread, each second a countdown to ruin. Daniel's determination burned, but his family's fear carved scars deeper than any wound. Daniel stormed into the office the next morning, determination carved into his face. He confronted Michael, slamming the forged file on his desk. "You knew," Daniel hissed. Michael's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. His silence screamed guilt louder than words. Colleagues stopped, pretending to work, yet watching with sharp eyes. Daniel's chest heaved, betrayal crushing his breath. Michael finally said, "It was survival." The words landed like daggers, piercing trust beyond repair. Daniel realized his fight was no longer against a faceless corporation, but against betrayal at its core. Daniel sat alone in the office stairwell, his back pressed against the cold concrete wall. His breathing echoed, ragged and uneven. The truth hit him with brutal clarity. He had been trapped. His allies had turned, his reputation weaponized, and the company now had every excuse to destroy him. He closed his eyes, whispering to himself, "They won't silence me." The stairwell light flickered, casting long shadows that crawled across his face. His fists tightened, fear mixing with defiance. Daniel knew the next step was no longer about survival, but about reclaiming his name at all costs. Daniel walked into the newsroom, documents clutched in his shaking hands. The smell of ink and stale coffee filled the air as a reporter looked up, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Do you know what you're doing?" she asked quietly. He nodded, voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. "If I don't, they'll bury the truth with me." She spread the papers across the desk, her brow furrowing as her eyes darted over the forged numbers and hidden transactions. The hum of printers and typing in the background became a drumbeat of urgency. Daniel's jaw clenched, fear mixing with resolve. This was no longer about survival, but about setting fire to the lies that had chained him. The next morning, headlines blared across screens. Massive corporate fraud exposed. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the article glowing on his laptop. His heart pounded as Sarah whispered, "They'll come after you harder now." Emily hugged his arm tightly, her small voice trembling. "Are we safe?" Daniel kissed her forehead, whispering, "I'll protect you." The morning sun spilled through the blinds, bright yet harsh, as though the world had changed overnight. The article was proof, but it was also a target painted on his back. Every sentence burned with both vindication and doom. At the courthouse, Daniel stood under towering marble pillars, clutching the evidence folder like a shield. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions, their voices colliding into a storm. He pushed forward, sweat glistening on his brow despite the cool air. Inside, the courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper. He raised his right hand, swearing to tell the truth, his voice steady though his heart thundered. Eyes bore into him from the gallery, some filled with support, others with doubt. Daniel spoke, each word falling like a hammer, exposing the rot buried deep within the company. Inside the courtroom, Daniel's voice echoed as he presented documents, pointing to forged numbers and hidden transfers. The defense attorney rose sharply, slamming papers down, shouting, "You fabricated this!" Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel's hands trembled, but his eyes stayed locked on the judge. "These are their lies, not mine," he said firmly. Sarah sat in the gallery, gripping Emily's hand, both their faces pale with fear. The silence that followed pressed against the walls, every breath suspended. The truth was a torch, and Daniel had chosen to hold it even if it burned him alive. The confrontation reached its peak as Daniel's final words cut through the courtroom. His voice cracked but carried, "I will not be silenced." The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. Murmurs filled the gallery, reporters scribbling furiously. Daniel felt his knees weaken, but he stood tall, chest heaving, eyes locked on the corporate leaders glaring from across the aisle. Their polished masks cracked under the weight of his testimony. He exhaled slowly, the room spinning with both victory and dread. He knew the war was far from over, but the silence had finally broken. The courthouse emptied, leaving Daniel standing alone at the steps. Reporters rushed off, chasing the next headline, while the executives slipped into dark cars, untouched by shame. The sky hung gray, heavy with drizzle, as though mourning what had been lost. Daniel whispered to himself, "It's done," but the words carried no relief. The truth was out, yet the company tower still stood tall. His name was scarred, his career fractured, and the silence of justice lingered louder than the gavel. Each raindrop felt like a reminder that exposing the truth didn't mean victory, it only meant survival had a price. At home, the kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Sarah sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. Emily drew silently on paper, her crayons scattered, eyes down. Daniel leaned against the counter watching them, the weight of his choices pressing harder now that the fight was public. "I did this for us," he said softly. Sarah didn't look up, her voice breaking. "But what will we have left?" Emily glanced at him, her eyes wide with questions too big for her years. The house felt smaller, not safer, walls closing in with the cost of his stand. The phone rang endlessly that night, calls from lawyers, journalists, strangers. Daniel let it buzz on the table, the sound gnawing at his nerves. He pressed his palms over his ears, staring at the ceiling as though silence might come, if he willed it hard enough. Sarah finally answered, her tone sharp. "No, he has nothing else to say tonight." She hung up, her eyes meeting his with exhaustion deeper than words. "We can't live like this," she whispered. Daniel's chest heaved, the truth burning him even as it freed him. The world outside demanded more, but his family was breaking inside. Daniel met with his lawyer in a dim office, walls lined with dusty books and heavy files. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, saying flatly, "Thou drag this out until you can't breathe." Daniel's hands curled into fists, his voice low. "Then I'll keep going." The lawyer sighed, sliding papers across the desk. "This isn't about truth anymore. It's about who survives the longest." Daniel looked down at the endless documents, each page another chain. His reflection in the glass of a picture frame stared back at him, fractured, weary, yet unwilling to bow. Late at night, Daniel stood outside on the porch, the cool air biting at his skin. The city lights flickered in the distance, a reminder of the world that had moved on without him. Sarah stepped behind him, wrapping her robe tighter, her eyes full of exhaustion. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. Daniel shook his head, though his voice faltered. "No, but I wish it hadn't cost us so much." Emily's laughter from a distant dream echoed faintly through the house, the sound cutting through the night like hope refusing to die. Daniel stared into the darkness, knowing the scars would never fade, but neither would the truth. Daniel sat in his darkened living room, the glow of the television washing over his weary face. News anchors debated his case with sharp voices, their words dissecting his choices as though his life was a headline, not a wound. He muted the screen, the silence pressing harder. On the table lay letters from strangers, some praising his courage, others condemning him as a traitor. He whispered, "Did it matter?" His reflection in the black glass of the TV looked back, hollow-eyed, a man both vindicated and ruined. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the weight of truth and betrayal sinking deeper than stone. The next morning, Daniel walked through the city streets, the crowd flowing around him like a river avoiding a stone. Snippets of whispers trailed in his wake, recognition mixed with disdain. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets, head bowed, but the stares still pierced him. Billboards above flashed corporate ads untouched by scandal, proof that the machine endured. He muttered, "They survive. I'm the one arrest." A vendor called out for customers, but his voice was drowned in the noise of car horns and footsteps. Daniel's chest tightened, the city both alive and suffocating. Every corner reminded him that truth had cost him belonging. That evening he met Sarah in the kitchen, the silence sharp as glass. She stood by the counter, arms folded, eyes tired. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she whispered. Daniel's chest constricted, his voice breaking. "I can't undo it." She turned away, shoulders trembling, her reflection fractured in the windowpane. Emily padded into the room clutching her sketchbook, her voice soft. "Can we be normal again?" Daniel bent down, hugging her tightly, his face buried in her hair. Tears pricked his eyes as he whispered, "I'll try." The truth had freed the world, but it had shackled his family. Daniel sat in a cafe corner, staring at untouched coffee, as a journalist approached, recorder ready. "One last quote?" she asked. He shook his head slowly, his voice flat. "Everything I had to say is already written in scars." She studied him, then quietly left, leaving him with the smell of roasted beans and the hollow clink of cups. He looked around at people laughing, their lives untouched, their problems lighter. For a fleeting second he envied them, but then the weight returned. His truth had changed nothing, yet it had changed him entirely. He whispered into the empty air, "At least I didn't stay silent." Late at night, Daniel sat at his desk, a resignation letter half written before him. The lamp buzzed, throwing shadows across the walls. He gripped the pen tightly, then let it drop, the sound soft but final. He whispered, "They want to race me this way." His eyes shifted to the window, where the city lights shimmered like ghosts. In the next room, Emily laughed in her sleep, the sound piercing him with fragile hope. Daniel closed the letter and slid it into a drawer, leaving it unfinished. He stood slowly, whispering to himself, "It was worth it." The silence that followed was heavy, but it carried the echo of defiance that could never be taken.